The first thing he saw wasn't the woman, it was the color red, a crimson stain spreading across the perfect, endless white of the blizzard. It was 1887 in northern Arizona, and the snow wasn't just falling, it was a wall coming down, burying the world in silence. For 8 years, Wyatt Cole had embraced that silence. It was his shield, his penance. His wife and son were buried under this same unforgiving sky, and he'd built his cabin like a tomb, a place to wait for the end. But then he saw the red, and out of the swirling white, a figure staggered into view. An Apache woman, maybe 25, her ceremonial buckskin dress torn, clinging to a frame that was all sharp angles and desperation. Her feet were bare, leaving those bloody prints in the snow. Her lips were cracked and blue, but her eyes burned. They weren't pleading. They were a challenge, a fire in the heart of the storm. He stood by his woodpile, axe in hand, a ghost in his own life. He watched her stumble, watched the wind whip her long black braid against a back held impossibly straight. He felt a flicker of something he'd buried long ago, something raw and human. He crushed it down. She wasn't a woman, she was a threat, a disruption to his long, quiet death. This basin was a trap. No sane person came here in a storm like this without gear, without a horse. He scanned the tree line, his knuckles white on the axe handle. He saw nothing. No tracks but hers. No ambush. But his gut screamed. The silence was too perfect. She fell to her knees not 10 yards from him, her head bowed, her breath a series of ragged little clouds. "Please," she whispered, the sound swallowed by the wind. "Let me in." Every instinct he had honed in the war, every lesson learned from 8 years of solitude, told him to turn around, to bolt the door and let the storm have her. His peace was paid for in blood and grief, and he owed the world nothing, especially not a stranger with burning eyes and a story he knew, just knew, was drenched in lies. He took a step toward her. The axe felt heavy in his hand. He wasn't a savior, but he wasn't a beast. Not yet. He crouched, keeping his distance, watching her. Her hands were splayed in the snow, fingers already turning a waxy, dangerous color. She looked up, and for a second, the defiance in her eyes wavered, replaced by a raw, animal fear. "I can reward you," she rasped, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them over the wind. He almost laughed. Reward him with what? She had nothing. No pack, no weapon, just the torn dress and the frost eating her alive. This was a trap. It had to be. But the emptiness of the woods behind her was absolute. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice a low growl he hardly recognized. She tried to answer, but only a faint shake of her head followed. He looked at the ridge, at the white void where the world ended. Then he looked at her. He swore under his breath, a curse against God, the world, and himself. He hooked one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. She was terrifyingly light, her body stiff with cold, but she didn't fight him. She simply collapsed against his chest, a bundle of frozen buckskin and secrets. He kicked the cabin door open and carried her inside, setting her down by the hearth. The sudden warmth was a shock to them both. A pot of beans simmered on the stove, the only scent in his world besides pine and sorrow. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from his cot and draped it over her trembling shoulders. Then he knelt to check her feet. They were red, raw, but not yet black with deep frostbite. Survivable. And that's when he saw it. Wrapped tight around her ankle, half hidden by the frayed hem of her dress, was a thin leather cord. Tied to it was a small, tightly sealed pouch. It was expertly made, waterproofed with pitch. It wasn't something you carried by accident. It was something you carried when it was the only thing in the world you had left to protect. He looked from the pouch to her face. Her eyes were closed now, exhaustion finally claiming her. He thought he was saving a desperate woman from a storm. But as he stared at that secret pouch, a cold dread washed over him. He was wrong. The storm was the least of her problems, and now it was the least of his, too. He fed her warm water, sweetened with honey and a pinch of salt. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the tin mug. He held it for her, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. She was all bone and ice. Her eyes, when they opened, were dark pools of pain and something else. Calculation. She was watching his every move. He sat back on his stool, the rifle propped against the wall just a few feet away. The cabin was a single room, a fortress he'd built with his own hands. Now it felt like a cage, and he wasn't sure which one of them was the prisoner. The snow fell harder, piling up against the shutters, sealing them in. The wind moaned, a low, mournful sound that usually soothed him. Tonight it sounded like a warning. "Who are you running from?" he asked, his voice flat. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the fire. She pulled the blanket tighter, a small, defensive gesture. "My people," she whispered, her voice still rough. "They cast me out." "Why?" She took a long, shuddering breath. "I was the chief's wife. I could not give him a son." It was a good story, a simple story, a story of tragedy and cultural harshness that a lonely white man in the wilderness might believe. It explained her ceremonial dress, her lack of supplies, her desperation. It was a perfect, heartbreaking tale, and Wyatt knew, with a certainty that chilled him deeper than the storm, that it was a lie. He'd seen men lie on the battlefield, seen them lie over cards, seen them lie to save their skin. There was a look, a flicker of invention in the eyes. He saw it in hers. But there was something else, too. The truth was buried right underneath the lie, and it was so terrifying she'd rather freeze to death than speak it. He let the silence hang in the air. He stirred the beans, the scrape of the spoon against the pot the only sound. He wouldn't push. Not yet. Pushing made people defensive. He would watch. He would wait. He gave her a bowl of beans and a piece of cornbread. She ate with a slow, deliberate grace, as if every mouthful was a victory. She didn't look at him, keeping her gaze fixed on the flames. She was building a wall between them, and he was content to let her, for now. He set up his spare cot for her near the stove, as far from his own as the small cabin would allow. He tossed a second blanket onto it. "Sleep," he grunted. "Stay warm." She moved slowly, wincing as her damaged feet touched the cold floorboards. As she lay down, her back to him, he saw the lines of tension in her shoulders. She wasn't resting. She was listening, waiting, just like him. He sat in his chair, rifle across his lap, and watched the fire die down to embers. He didn't want her story. He didn't want her pain. He had enough of his own to last a dozen lifetimes. But the image of that secret pouch tied to her ankle was burned into his mind. People didn't risk life and limb for trinkets. They risked it for things that could get them killed, or get the people chasing them killed. The cabin creaked under the weight of the snow. He must have dozed off because a sudden, sharp crack from outside jolted him awake. It wasn't the sound of a falling branch. It was sharper, more deliberate. He was at the window in a second, peering through a tiny gap in the shutters. The blizzard was relentless, a swirling vortex of white. For a moment he saw nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the tree line. It was a man on horseback, a long rifle held across his lap. He was just sitting there, a dark statue in the storm, staring directly at the cabin. He wasn't seeking shelter. He was keeping watch. Wyatt's blood ran cold. They hadn't been chasing her. They had been herding her, straight to him. He backed away from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked over at the woman. Her name, he realized. He didn't even know her name. She was still facing the wall, but he knew she was awake. He could feel it. The tension in the room had ratcheted up, becoming a living, breathing thing. "They're here," he said, his voice a low whisper. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she slowly turned over. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resignation. It was the look of a soldier who knew the battle was lost but was determined to go down fighting. "I know," she breathed. "I led them here." The confession hung in the air, more dangerous than the man outside. She hadn't stumbled upon his cabin by chance. She had chosen it. She had brought this danger, this siege to his door. "Why?" he demanded, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Why me?" She pushed herself up, the blanket falling away. In the dim firelight, he could see the strength returning to her, the sharp lines of her face hardening into a mask of resolve. Because they fear you, she said, her voice steady now, clear as a bell. They call you the gray ghost of the basin, the man who talks to the dead. Wyatt stared at her. The name was one he hadn't heard in years, a name whispered by the local tribes, a legend they'd built around the strange white man who lived alone in the place where his family died. He'd thought it was just superstitious nonsense. He never imagined it could be used as a weapon or a shield. You used my grief as a landmark, he said, the bitterness rising in his throat. I used your strength as a hope, she countered, her gaze unwavering. A sharp whistle cut through the storm from outside. It was a signal. The man on horseback was no longer alone. More shadows were emerging from the trees, circling the cabin like wolves. They weren't in a hurry. They had them trapped. The storm was their ally. He slammed the heavy bar across the door, the thud echoing the finality of their situation. He checked the loads in his rifle, his movements automatic, a grim muscle memory from a life he thought he'd left behind. You have a name? He asked, not looking at her. Laya. Well, Laya, he said, moving to the opposite window. You wanted my help. You've got it. But you're going to tell me everything. Right now. What is in that pouch? She hesitated, her jaw tight. He turned to face her, the rifle held loosely in his hands, but the threat was clear. The time for lies is over, he said, his voice like stones grinding together. They're not here because you're barren. They're here to get that pouch back, and they're willing to kill both of us to do it. Laya looked at the door, then at the rifle in his hands. She took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water. She reached down and untied the leather cord from her ankle. She held a small oilskin pouch in her palm, weighing it, weighing her chances. It's not what's in the pouch they want, she said softly, her eyes locking onto his. It's what the pouch represents. She didn't open it. She just held it out to him. My husband, the chief, his name is Kale. He made a deal. He sold rights to the river that feeds our people's winter grounds. Sold it to railroad men for gold. Wyatt felt a pit form in his stomach. Selling water rights in this part of the country wasn't just a bad deal. It was a death sentence for anyone who relied on that water. No one in the tribe knows, she continued, her voice low and urgent. He told them the river was drying up because the spirits were angry. Angry with me for failing to produce an heir. He made me the scapegoat for his own greed. It was a story that made a horrifying amount of sense. It explained the hunt, the desperation, the lies. She wasn't a victim of tradition. She was a whistleblower. So what's in the pouch? Wyatt pressed, his eyes still fixed on the small bundle. Proof, she said. A piece of the treaty map, given to him by the railroad surveyor. It shows the diversion dam they plan to build. It has the surveyor's signature and Kale's mark, thumbprint pressed in ink. It proves he betrayed us all. Wyatt took the pouch. It was lighter than he expected, holding the weight of an entire people's future. He looked at Laya, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw past the desperate woman in the snow. He saw a warrior. She hadn't been running from Kale. She'd been running to expose him. Another whistle outside, closer this time. They were testing their defenses, getting bolder. They won't risk damaging the pouch, Laya said as if reading his thoughts. They won't use fire. They'll try to wait us out. Or come in and take it by force. Wyatt moved back to the shuttered window, peering through the crack. He could count 4 of them now, maybe 5, positioned strategically. They were disciplined, not just angry tribesmen. Kale's personal guard, fanatically loyal. Your story changes things, Wyatt said, his mind racing, calculating angles, ammunition, supplies. But it doesn't change the fact that we're trapped. No, Laya said, coming to stand beside him. She pointed a slender finger toward the floorboards near the hearth. We're not. He followed her gaze. It was a section of the floor like any other, worn smooth by years of use. He saw nothing. 8 years you've lived here, she said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. And you never found it? She knelt down, her fingers tracing the seams between 2 boards. She pressed a specific spot on a knot in the wood. With a soft click, a section of the flooring popped up, revealing a dark square hole, a hidden cellar. Wyatt stared, dumbfounded. He had built this cabin, but he'd built it on the foundations of an older, rotted-out shack that had been here when he arrived. He'd never bothered to dig it out, just built right on top of it. My people have known of this place for generations, Laya explained. It was a trading post, long before your time. The trappers used this cellar to hide their best pelts from thieves. She had known about this escape route the entire time. She hadn't led the hunters to a fortress. She had led them to a maze. A rock suddenly slammed against the cabin's roof, followed by a guttural shout in Apache. A demand. Send out the woman. Wyatt looked from the dark opening in the floor to Laya's determined face. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. In their place was a burning, righteous fury. She had a plan. She had always had a plan, and he was just a piece on her board. He wasn't her savior. He wasn't her shield. He was her weapon, and the battle for the basin had just begun. The cellar leads out to the creek bed, Laya explained, her voice barely a whisper over the howling wind. It's 100 yards under the snow. They won't see us leave. Wyatt peered into the darkness. It smelled of damp earth and forgotten seasons. And then what? He asked. We run barefoot through a blizzard with Cal's best warriors on our heels? No, she said, and for the first time, he saw the full, chilling depth of her strategy. You stay. You make them think I'm still here. You create a diversion. I go. He stared at her. She wanted him to face 5 armed men alone, as a decoy, while she disappeared into the storm with the proof. It was a suicide mission, his suicide mission. You're asking me to die for you, he said, the words stark and cold. I'm asking you to fight for what's right, she corrected him, her dark eyes flashing. The same thing I'm doing. Cale won't just kill me. When his people starve this winter because the river is gone, he will tell them it was the white man in the basin who cursed the water. He will turn their grief and their anger on every homesteader in this territory. Your people will pay for his sins. This is your fight too. You just didn't know it yet. She was right. The cold, brutal logic of it settled in his bones. This wasn't just her tribe's problem anymore. Kyle had made it everyone's. A volley of arrows thudded into the cabin's log walls. They weren't trying to kill them yet. They were trying to intimidate them, trying to break their will. How much time do you need? Wyatt asked, his decision made. To get to the trading post at Whisper Creek? With this storm? A day, maybe more. A full day. He had to hold them off, alone, for a full day. He looked at his ammunition. 20 rounds for the rifle, a dozen for his pistol. It wasn't nearly enough. They'll rush the cabin as soon as they realize you're gone, he thought aloud. They won't, Laya said. She reached into the folds of her buckskin dress and pulled out a small, carved wooden bird. This was a gift from my younger sister Nara. She is still in the camp. When I reach the trading post, I will send a signal back with the trader. He will release a hawk with a red ribbon tied to its leg. My sister will see it. She will know I am safe and the proof is delivered. She will rally the elders who have long suspected Cale's treachery. And what happens to me when they finally break down that door and find you gone? Laya met his gaze and her expression softened for just a moment. The warrior was gone, replaced by the woman. You'll be gone too, she said. The tunnel has a second exit, farther down the creek. A rockfall. Easy to miss. Once I'm clear, you follow. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. He nodded once. Go. Take the last of the bread and the water skin. He helped her down into the cellar. Her hand was warm in his for a fleeting second. Be careful, gray ghost, she whispered, and then she was gone, swallowed by the earth. He slid the floorboards back into place. The click was deafening in the sudden silence. He was alone, truly alone now. He moved around the cabin, making noise. He kicked over a stool. He spoke aloud, pretending to argue with her. He needed to sell the performance of his life. He risked another look through the shutters. The warriors were getting impatient. One of them, a big man with a cruel face and a scar down his cheek, was gesturing angrily at the cabin. This must be their leader. Wyatt raised his rifle, sighting the man's chest. It was an easy shot. He could take one of them out right now, thin their numbers, but that would trigger an immediate assault. He needed to buy Laya time. He needed to play their game. He fired a single shot into the air. Through the chimney flew. A warning, a sign of defiance. The warriors outside scrambled for cover. The big man with the scar shouted an order. They weren't going to be so patient anymore. Wyatt backed away from the window, his heart a cold, steady drum. He thought of his wife, of his son. He had failed to protect them. He had run from the world and hidden in his grief. But Laya was right. The fight had come to him, and this time he wouldn't run. He dragged the heavy table and barred it against the door. He overturned the cot, creating another piece of cover. He was turning his home into a battlefield. The hours crawled by. The storm raged. He kept up the charade, calling out to Laya, cursing at her, making it sound like a hostage situation gone wrong. Every creak of the logs, every howl of the wind sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He thought about the cellar. He could leave now, slip away and save himself. Laya would be on her own, but she was smart, resourceful. She might make it. But the image of that big warrior's cruel face flashed in his mind. The thought of Kyle selling out his own people. The memory of Laya's burning eyes. He couldn't run. Not this time. Just as dawn threatened to break through the gray gloom, he heard a new sound. A heavy, rhythmic thud against the back wall of the cabin. They weren't trying to break down the door. They were trying to smash their way through the logs themselves. With a battering ram, the first crack appeared in the wood, splintering near the floor. Dust and snow sprayed into the room. They would be inside in minutes. It was time. Wyatt took one last look around the cabin that had been his sanctuary and his prison. He kicked the legs out from under the stove, sending the pot of beans and hot coals spilling across the floor. Smoke began to fill the room instantly. A fire would give him cover, but it was a double-edged sword. It would destroy the cabin and force him out. He grabbed his rifle and pistol, stuffed the extra ammunition in his pockets, and threw open the cellar door. The smoke was already thickening, stinging his eyes. He dropped into the darkness just as the cabin wall gave way with a deafening crash. He could hear the triumphant shouts of the warriors as they poured into the smoke-filled room. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the cellar door shut from below, plunging himself into total blackness, and scrambled down the tunnel, away from the chaos and the flames. He was running on pure instinct, his hands scraping against the cold, damp earth. The sounds of the battle above faded behind him. He was alive. He was free. He followed the tunnel until he felt a faint draft of cold air. The second exit. He pushed aside a curtain of frozen roots and peered out through a narrow gap in a pile of rocks. He was in the creek bed, 20 yards downstream from where Laya had emerged. The blizzard was easing, the visibility improving. Too much. He saw them. Two warriors standing guard by the creek. They hadn't fallen for the diversion. Kyle was smarter than that. He'd known about the tunnel. He'd covered the exits. Wyatt ducked back behind the rocks, his mind racing. Laya. Had she made it past them? Or had she walked right into a trap? He was caught between the hunting party at his burning cabin and the guards on the creek. He was exposed, outgunned, and running out of time. He looked up at the sky, a churning sea of gray. No red-ribboned hawk, not yet. He had to assume Laya was captured, or worse. The proof, the map, would be back in Cale's hands. All of it, the fight, the fire, his stand, it would all be for nothing. Unless, he thought about the pouch, about Laya holding it out to him, the way she'd said, "It's not what's in the pouch they want, it's what the pouch represents." A strange choice of words. He reached into his coat pocket. He'd been so focused on the fight, on survival, that he'd forgotten. When he'd handed her the water skin and the bread, she had pressed something small and hard into his hand. He'd shoved it into his pocket without thinking. He pulled it out. It was the pouch. The real pouch. She had given him a fake, a decoy. She'd known this might happen. She'd anticipated every move, every failure. She hadn't asked him to be her weapon. She had asked him to be her decoy, just like the fake pouch. His mission wasn't over. It had just changed. He wasn't the diversion anymore. He was the courier, and Laya had walked willingly into a trap to give him a head start. The weight of that sacrifice settled on him, heavier than any grief he had ever known. He looked at the two warriors guarding the creek. They were between him and Whisper Creek, between him and keeping his unspoken promise to a woman who had trusted him with her life and the lives of her people. He checked the load in his rifle. He only had one advantage. They thought he was trapped in the cabin. They didn't know he was behind them. The element of surprise. He wouldn't get a second chance. He took a deep, steadying breath, the icy air burning his lungs. The gray ghost was about to live up to his name. He moved like smoke, a silent wraith along the frozen creek bed. The years of hunting in this basin, of learning every rock and every hollow, were paying off. The two warriors were focused downstream, expecting Lyre to appear from that direction. They never thought to look behind them. Wyatt came up on the first man from the side, a ghost in the snow. He didn't use the rifle. A gunshot would bring the others running. He used the heavy butt of the gun, a swift, brutal arc that connected with the man's temple. The warrior dropped without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut. The second man turned, alerted by the soft thud of the body falling. His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening to shout a warning. He never got the chance. Wyatt was already on him, driving a fist into his throat, silencing the cry before it was born. They fell together into the snow, a grim, silent struggle. Wyatt was stronger, fueled by a cold, desperate rage. It was over in seconds. He dragged the bodies behind a thicket of snow-laden junipers. He took their knives, their extra arrows, and a small pouch of dried jerky. Supplies. He was in this for the long haul now. He looked back toward the cabin. The smoke was thinning. Kyle's men would be realizing the truth any moment now. They'd find the bodies. They'd know the real pouch was with him. The hunt would begin again, but this time he was the prey. He had to move, and he had to move fast. Whisper Creek was a day's hard journey in good weather. In this biting cold, with deep snow and the threat of pursuit, it was a near impossible task. He pushed the thought of Leia from his mind. He couldn't afford to dwell on her capture. He had to assume she was alive, buying him time, fighting in her own way. He had to honor her sacrifice. He ran. He kept to the low ground, using the terrain for cover, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges behind him. The snow was both his enemy and his ally. It made the going slow and treacherous, but it also covered his tracks within minutes. Hours passed. The sun was a pale, useless disk in the sky. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed. The jerky was gone, and he scooped handfuls of snow into his mouth to fight off the gnawing thirst. He found a small rock outcropping to rest for a few minutes, his back to the wind. He was exhausted, but a grim determination pushed him forward. He thought of his son, a small boy taken by fever. He remembered the feeling of helplessness, of watching life slip away, while he could do nothing. He wasn't helpless now. He had a mission. He had a purpose. It was a strange, terrible gift from a woman he barely knew. As dusk began to settle, painting the snow in shades of purple and gray, he saw them. Far behind him, on the ridge he'd crossed hours ago, 3 figures on horseback. They were moving fast, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. They had found the bodies and were closing the distance far quicker than he could on foot. His heart sank. They would run him down before he ever reached the creek. On open ground, he was no match for men on horseback. He scrambled for a new plan. He couldn't outrun them, so he had to outthink them. He looked around, his eyes wild, searching for an advantage. The terrain here was flatter, more exposed. But to his left, the ground dropped off into a narrow pine-choked canyon. Devil's Tooth Canyon. The locals said it was haunted, a place of treacherous footing and sudden drop-offs, a place no one on horseback would dare to enter. It was his only chance. He veered off his path, plunging down the steep embankment into the canyon's twilight gloom. The snow was deeper here, clinging to the steep walls. The trees grew thick, their branches like skeletal arms reaching for him. The wind had a different voice down here, a low, hungry whisper. He pushed deeper into the canyon, the darkness closing in around him. He could hear the faint sound of the horses above, the riders shouting to one another. They were tracking him to the canyon's edge. He pressed himself into a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders, trying to control his ragged breathing. He heard one of the riders dismount, his footsteps crunching in the snow just above his hiding place. "He went in," a voice called out. It was the big warrior, the one with the scar. His voice was laced with frustration. "No man can cross Devil's Tooth in the dark," another replied. "He'll freeze or fall by morning. We'll pick up his trail then. He can't escape." Wyatt heard them ride off, their hoofbeats fading into the night. They were setting up camp, waiting for the dawn. They thought he was trapped, but Wyatt knew something they didn't. He knew this canyon. Years ago, hunting a wounded buck, he had followed it for miles. He knew its twists, its turns, and its secrets, including the one secret that was going to save his life. Deep within the canyon, hidden behind a frozen waterfall, was a narrow cave system, a shortcut that would spit him out on the other side of the ridge, miles ahead of Cale's men. They thought they had him cornered. They thought the night and the cold were their allies. They were wrong. The darkness was his shield. The cold was his cloak. They weren't hunting a man. They were hunting a ghost. And this ghost knew the way home. The cave was a slick, icy throat leading into the mountain's gut. Wyatt moved by touch, one hand on the rough stone wall, the other holding his rifle. The darkness was absolute, a physical pressure against his eyes. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of melting ice and the frantic beat of his own heart. He pushed forward, fighting the claustrophobia that threatened to choke him. He stumbled, his boots sliding on the slick floor, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he'd taken a wrong turn. He remembered the old stories of hunters getting lost in these caves, their bones found years later. But then he felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible change in the air, a whisper of a breeze against his cheek. He was close to the exit. He scrambled faster, hope surging through him. He emerged from the cave into the pre-dawn light, his clothes soaked, his body bruised but alive. He was on the far side of the ridge. He looked back. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of a campfire. Cale's men. He had bypassed them completely. Whisper Creek was only a few miles away now. He ran, ignoring the pain in his legs and the fire in his lungs. He was fueled by a single image. Laya's face, her eyes trusting him. He couldn't let her down. He saw the trading post just as the sun broke over the horizon. It was a miserable-looking place, a single log building with a sagging porch, a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. But to Wyatt, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. He burst through the door, his rifle at the ready. A short, balding man in a dirty apron looked up from behind the counter, his eyes wide with fear. "I need to send a message," Wyatt gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "A hawk, with a red ribbon." The trader, a man named Silas, just stared at him. "Mister, you look like you've seen the devil himself." "Worse," Wyatt said, pulling the precious oilskin pouch from his coat. "I'm carrying his mail." Silas's eyes fell on the pouch, and a flicker of understanding and then pure terror crossed his face. He knew. He knew what this was about. The rumors of Cale's deal with the railroad must have spread farther than Leia thought. "You're the man from the basin," Silas whispered. "The gray ghost." "Get the bird," Wyatt ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. While Silas scrambled to the cages out back, Wyatt scanned the meager supplies in the post. He grabbed a sack and filled it with dried meat, hardtack, and a box of rifle cartridges. He was paying with the spoils from the warriors he'd taken down. War reparations. Silas returned with the hawk, a magnificent creature that watched Wyatt with intelligent, predatory eyes. Wyatt took a strip of red cloth from a bolt on the counter and tied it securely to the bird's leg. "Let her fly," he said. Silas opened the window and released the hawk. It circled once, a slash of red against the blue morning sky, and then soared away, heading back toward the basin, back toward Leia's people. The first part of the promise was kept. The signal was sent. "Now what?" Silas asked, his voice trembling. "Cale's men will have seen you come here. They'll be on their way." "I know," Wyatt said, slinging the sack of supplies over his shoulder. He was reloading his rifle, his movements calm and efficient. The exhaustion was gone, burned away by a cold, clear purpose. "And I'll be waiting for them." Silas paled. "You can't fight them alone. There are 3 of them, maybe more." "There were 5, Wyatt corrected him quietly. He looked around the trading post. It was situated in a narrow pass with high rocks on either side, a perfect bottleneck, a perfect place for an ambush. "You're going to get yourself killed," Silas stammered. "Maybe," Wyatt said, turning to leave, "but I'm not running anymore." He left the trading post and climbed the rocky slope to the east, finding a position that gave him a clear view of the trail leading from the basin. He settled in, the cold rock seeping into his bones, and waited. He was a hunter again, but this time his prey was man. He didn't have to wait long. Within the hour he saw them. 3 riders pushing their horses hard. The man with the scar was in the lead, his face a mask of fury. They were riding straight into his trap. Wyatt raised his rifle, the stock firm against his shoulder. He lined up his sights on the lead rider. He let out a slow, steady breath. The world narrowed to the man, the rifle, and the shot. He thought he was just a lonely man waiting to die in the wilderness. He thought his story was over. He was wrong. A new chapter was being written in blood and gunpowder, here in this lonely mountain pass, and he would be the one to finish it. He squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the pass like a crack of thunder. The lead rider, the one with the scar, was thrown from his saddle as if struck by an invisible fist. He was dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 warriors reined in their horses, confusion and panic on their faces. They scanned the rocks, searching for the source of the shot. They were exposed, perfect targets. Wyatt worked the bolt on his rifle, the metallic shink-shink, a sound of grim satisfaction. He sighted the second rider. Fired. The man slumped forward, clutching his chest, and slid sideways off his horse. 2 down, 1 to go. The last warrior was smarter. He leaped from his horse, using the animal for cover, and returned fire. A bullet ricocheted off the rock near Wyatt's head, spraying him with stone fragments. Wyatt ducked down, his heart pounding. This was no longer a turkey shoot. This was a duel. He crawled along the ledge, changing his position, forcing the warrior below to guess his location. He could hear the man shouting, a mix of Apache and broken English, curses and threats. "Come out, ghost!" the warrior screamed. "Face me like a man!" Wyatt stayed silent. He wasn't a soldier anymore, fighting for a flag. He was an executioner, delivering a verdict. He popped up from a different spot, getting off a quick shot that missed, but forced the warrior to move. The man scrambled for a new position behind a cluster of boulders. Now they were both pinned down, a deadly stalemate. Wyatt knew he couldn't wait forever. Sooner or later, the man would try to flank him or make a run for it. He had to force the issue. He took a calculated risk. He took off his hat and placed it on the end of his rifle, slowly raising it above the rock he was hiding behind. The instant the hat appeared, a shot rang out, punching a neat hole through the felt. It was the opening Wyatt needed. While the warrior was focused on the decoy, Wyatt burst from cover, sprinting to a new vantage point that gave him a clear angle on the man's position. The warrior saw him, his eyes wide with surprise. He tried to bring his rifle around, but he was too slow. Wyatt fired. The third man fell. Silence descended on the pass, broken only by the whistling of the wind and the nervous stamping of the riderless horses. It was over. Wyatt slowly, cautiously, made his way down from the rocks, his rifle still ready. He checked each of the bodies. They were Cale's men, his most loyal enforcers. Without them, Kel was vulnerable. He gathered their weapons and ammunition and loaded them onto one of the horses. He now had supplies, a mount, and a fighting chance. He looked back in the direction of the basin. The hawk had delivered the message. Laya's sister, Nara, would be acting by now. The elders would be gathering. Kyle's web of lies was unraveling, but he would not go down without a fight. He would turn his rage on Laya. Wyatt knew he couldn't wait for the tribe to sort itself out. He had to go back. He had to get her out. He mounted one of the horses, a strong-looking bay, and kicked it into a gallop. He was no longer running from the basin. He was riding into the heart of the storm. The ride back was a blur of snow and wind and grim determination. He pushed the horse hard, knowing that every minute counted. He was no longer the gray ghost, a passive legend. He was an active threat, a one-man army riding to settle a score. As he neared the tribal encampment, he slowed, dismounting and tethering the horse in a thick grove of pines. He moved the rest of the way on foot, silent as a shadow. The camp was in turmoil. He could see people gathered in tense groups arguing. He saw the hawk's red ribbon, now tied to the central pole of the council lodge. The signal had been received, and it had fractured the tribe. He saw Kale standing before the crowd, trying to command their loyalty, his voice booming. But there was a desperate edge to it now. He was losing control. And then he saw Laya. She was tied to a post in the center of the camp, her head held high, her gaze defiant. Her sister, a younger version with the same fire in her eyes, stood nearby, arguing with Kyle, defending her. Kyle saw he was losing the crowd. He needed to make a move, to reassert his dominance. He drew a long knife, its blade gleaming in the cold light. He strode toward Laya. "This woman brought a curse upon us," he roared, pointing the knife at her. "She consorted with the gray ghost, the spirit who sours the river. She is a traitor, and she will die like one." The crowd gasped. Some looked away. Others shouted in protest. It was chaos. Wyatt knew this was his moment. He couldn't fight the whole tribe, but he didn't have to. He just had to fight one man. He stepped out from the trees, his rifle held loosely at his side. He didn't raise it. He just walked forward, into the center of the camp. A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to him. The whispers started. The gray ghost. He was no longer a myth. He was flesh and blood, walking into their midst. Kale froze, the knife in his hand, his face a mixture of shock and fury. "You," he spat. "Me," Wyatt said, his voice calm and steady, carrying across the clearing. He stopped about 20 feet from Kale. He ignored the knife, the crowd, everything but the chief. "It's over, Kale. Your men are dead. The proof is with the elders. You have nowhere left to run." "This is my land, my people," Kyle screamed, his composure shattering. "They will do as I say." "They are not your people," a new voice said. It was Laya, her voice ringing with strength. "They are the people, and you betrayed them. You sold their future for gold." Nara, her sister, stepped forward, holding up a familiar oilskin pouch. "The decoy." "He lied," she shouted. "My sister speaks the truth. The real proof is gone, delivered. Kale's deal is broken." Kale looked from Wyatt to Laya to Nara. He saw the tide turning against him in the faces of his people. He was cornered. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. He lunged, but not at Wyatt. He lunged at Laya, the knife raised, a final, spiteful act of murder. Wyatt had been waiting for it. The rifle came up, smooth and fast. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed to stop. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space of the camp. Kale cried out, dropping the knife as the bullet tore through his shoulder, shattering the bone. He staggered back, clutching the wound, his reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with a pathetic, whimpering cry of pain. The elders surged forward, surrounding Kale, their faces grim. Justice would be served their way. Wyatt moved to Laya, cutting her bonds with one of the knives he'd taken. Her wrists were raw, but she stood tall, rubbing the circulation back into her hands. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. "You came back." "I made a promise," he said simply. She reached out and her fingers brushed his cheek, a simple touch that conveyed more than words ever could. It was gratitude, respect, and the beginning of something new. The harsh Arizona winter finally broke, giving way to a tentative spring. The snow melted, and the river, the one Kale had tried to sell, flowed full and clear once more. The tribe, under new leadership chosen by the elders, began to heal. Wyatt and Laya left the basin. They didn't belong there anymore. His ghosts were finally at peace, and her future was her own to write. They traveled south, toward warmer lands, toward a new life. They didn't talk much about the future. They didn't have to. They were building it one day at a time. Two survivors who had found in each other not a savior, but an equal. One evening, camped under a vast, star-filled sky, Laya sat by the fire, her hand resting on her belly. It was a subtle gesture, one Wyatt might have missed if he wasn't watching her so closely. "It's been weeks," she said, her voice soft. "The moon has cycled twice." He froze, a piece of firewood halfway to the flames. He looked at her, at the gentle curve of her stomach that he hadn't noticed before. A child. A new life forged in the heart of a blizzard and a battle. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel dread. He felt a profound, aching sense of hope, a hope he thought had died with his first family. He reached out and placed his hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the promise of the life beneath. This child would not be born to a chief, to a title, or to a legacy of lies. This child would be born to them, a child of the storm, a child of survival. Ours, he whispered, the word feeling foreign and wonderful on his tongue. Laya smiled, a true radiant smile that lit up her face and chased away the last of the shadows in his heart. Ours, she echoed. They had faced down death, betrayal, and the bitter cold of a world that had tried to break them both. They had survived. More than that, they had found a reason to live again. The gray ghost had finally found his dawn. The story of the man who walked out of the woods and the woman who led him there became a legend in its own right, a tale told around campfires for generations to come, a reminder that even in the deepest, darkest winter, spring is always waiting. If you believe that courage can change the world and that hope can be found in the most unexpected places, do us a favor. Hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. And let us know in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from tonight?